Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I want to thank everyone for attending first and foremost, and we hope that you are enjoying the great content put together by Trio of Maryland. We want to take a minute here to recognize our sponsors. So now we have a word from Peak Relief, no connection to me whatsoever in spite of the coincidental last name.
Welcome to an introduction of the role of medical cannabis with transplantation, a video presentation by Peak Relief, a medical cannabis dispensary in Rockville, Maryland. If you have questions following this video, please feel free to email us info@peakrelief.com. Here are a few key things to remember when utilizing medical cannabis to provide therapeutic relief for issues that you may be facing. One of the most important things to keep in mind is take your time and ask plenty of questions when meeting the staff of a medical cannabis dispensary. If you're able to meet with the dispensary's clinical director, definitely make that a priority. Curious about the endocannabinoid system you keep hearing about? Well, the endocannabinoid system is a complex cell signaling system identified in the early 1900s. The ECS is tied to many of the processes in the human body, some of which you may be pretty familiar with. As you can see, the endocannabinoid system is the key to so many functions and operations in our body. There are many opinions about medical cannabis use, and that's why before adding it to your wellness plan, it's important to speak with your healthcare provider. And if you need more information that may help you speak to your provider, let us know. We will be happy to share educational resources that may help you. Are there complications related to cannabis use for transplant patients? A small number of retrospective studies have assessed transplant outcomes in patients with active cannabis use. In summary, more data are needed to accurately evaluate the association between cannabis use and post-transplant outcome. However, based on small retrospective studies, there is no obvious signal for harm in transplant recipients. Where can I get more information about cannabis use? At Peak Relief, we strive to increase the knowledge of the general public through detailed and informative content that helps to remove the unnecessary stigma surrounding the medical cannabis industry. So head to our website and take advantage of our cannabis curriculum and additional educational resources. It details everything from the parts of the cannabis plant to the current laws governing the use of medical cannabis in Maryland, to the endocannabinoid system and even the most common routes of administration of medical cannabis. We look forward to your visit if you decide to become a medical cannabis patient. Don't hesitate to send any questions you may have our way.
Our last session of the day is transplant medications, drug and food interactions post-transplant. Please remember you can post your questions in the Q&A tab and we will share with the speaker after the presentation as time allows. We are excited to have Dr. Ryan Whistler with us here today. He has been working with the Johns Hopkins outpatient pharmacies for the past 10 years, 9 working with solid organ transplant recipients and their caregivers to ensure medication access via financial aid coordination and the understanding of complex medication regimens. Please welcome Dr. Whistler.
All right, thank you, Mr. Peak, and thank you all. I can't see you all out there, but thank you all for being here today. I'm gonna go ahead and put my presentation up on the screen and we'll get started. Okay, so as was mentioned, I'm going to be talking about drug and food interactions post-transplant. So I've broken this down into 2 sections. The first section will be about drugs, and then we'll get into food and herbals. Just as an aside, I did not know we were going to have a sponsor this morning. It happened to be about an herbal product. So just kind of an interesting coincidence. So if anyone has questions about medical cannabis or any other herbals, as David said, you can save them for the end. I'll try to leave about 15 minutes or so for us to go over any questions that you might have. So in terms of the objectives for this first part of the presentation, I wanted to kind of explain the importance of identifying drug-drug interactions and caring for a transplanted organ. I'm sure most of you have heard the term drug-drug interactions before, but I'm going to try to describe some of the common types because not all drug interactions are created equal, nor do they kind of work the same way mechanistically in the body. So I want to try to give you some more background information about what we as pharmacists, physicians, and the rest of the healthcare team are looking at when we evaluate drug interactions. And then also talk about some of the common drug-drug interactions that particularly post-transplant patients might observe I kind of picked post-transplant recipients because depending on what type of transplant you'd need as a pre-transplant recipient, it's just a lot of variety. So it's kind of hard to narrow down anything that's really a common theme, but there are some common themes for post-transplant patients that I can go over with you. So this next slide is an example of a drug interaction screening. So this comes from a database called LexiComp. It's a really common one that the medical community uses to evaluate drug interactions, among other things. And so you can see this is, I would say, pretty complex at first glance. Got a lot of different drug interactions, and we only have really about 8 or 9 drugs, and we're looking at all these different interactions that are sometimes listed multiple times. They've got different letters next to them, which will indicate the general severity of drug-drug interactions, but you can kind of see just from a relatively small drug sample size, there's really a lot as a clinical practitioner to evaluate and decide what's pertinent, what do I need to monitor, what do I need to alter therapy, and what do I need to warn my patient about. So there's just a lot of considerations that we need to make when we're looking at a list of drug-drug interactions. So again, I'll try to get into breaking down this list a little bit more for you later in the presentation. So in terms of the impact of drug-drug interactions, as I kind of been alluding to, it's really dependent on what medications we're looking at interacting and the severity of the interactions. So some of the interactions on the last screen that I showed you, may be relatively clinically unimportant. Like we know they're there, and if we happen to see some sort of side effect or lab value that pops up, then we might want to investigate it further. But generally, when we're initiating therapy with two drugs that have kind of a minor interaction, we're less concerned about those. Another time that we're on the flip side more concerned about drug interactions are with medications that fall into what we call a narrow therapeutic window. And so just what that means is that there's a small difference between the level at which the drug kind of works well and where we want it to be, and where the drug doesn't work well, and on the flip side, where it's kind of working too well and causing toxicity. So again, that window of drug level is very small for some medications compared to others. So that means that those, maybe minor to moderate interactions, they might be more significant in that case, whereas a drug that doesn't have a narrow therapeutic window, even moderate to maybe major interactions are not going to cause any problems for us. And so as the next bullet point indicates, with these narrow therapeutic windows drugs, and really with any drug, the interactions can be serious, and unfortunately they can lead up to graft loss, so the loss of your organ, or potentially death if they're left unmonitored for a long period of time. But again, most drug interactions do not impact a patient's health. So, you might be reading a drug monograph and it says, don't take X with Y. If you take X medication, let your doctor know about this or that. There's, just a lot of potential side effects out there, but it's our job as clinicians to kind of let you as a patient and a caregiver know what's important, what's not important. So next I'm going to get into a couple types of drug-drug interactions. So again, like the mechanisms behind how drugs interact in the body. And so this first one is altered absorption. And I think this is maybe the kind of the one as clinicians we don't think about maybe as much. So I wanted to start here. And so what happens here is when you take one medication, it lowers the body's ability to absorb another medication. So essentially, what's going on here are these, in this case, these drugs need to be taken kind of around the same time. They need to be present in your stomach or in your small intestine, which is where the stomach empties, to cause a problem. And probably the most common one in terms of altered absorption is drugs that lower the acidity of your stomach. So acid, might sound like a bad word. It certainly can be a bad thing, but actually the acid level in your stomach is very important in breaking down food, but also medications. So some medications are dependent on an acid environment to be absorbed, to be broken down, so that your body can take those medications in and get where they need to go. And if we're using medications that lower the stomach's acidity, then that might not happen, or at least might not happen to the same extent. So the best example I have is taking calcium, so something like a Tums supplement at the same time as mycophenolate, which some of you might be familiar with. The other name for that is Cellcept. That's a medication that many of our patients take early on after transplant. Some patients take it over the long term, but if you take calcium at the same time of mycophenolate, it actually will, in addition to causing acid reduction, it actually will bind up the mycophenolate, so it makes it hard for the body to absorb. So if you take those two medications at the same time, your body might not get the mycophenolate that it needs. Being an anti-rejection medication, if that happens, that could put you at higher risk for rejection. However, this is one of those situations where I would say we're less concerned that there's going to be a serious clinical effect if you take calcium with mycophenolate. Mycophenolate's not a narrow therapeutic window drug, so an interaction like this, while it's present, is usually not a cause for concern. So here I have just kind of a schematic because helps me think about what's going on. So for anyone who doesn't know, this is supposed to be a representation of Pac-Man. And so you can see the top screen there where he's kind of eating those blue dots that we might be familiar with, was kind of the name of the game. When you play Pac-Man, you're trying to eat up all the dots on the screen. So that top line, he's just kind of chugging along, eating dots as he normally would. In the bottom part of the screen, you can see instead of a circle, he's got a square. And so, Pac-Man's really designed to eat circles, or I guess fruit, but there's not really a time in the game that he's supposed to be eating a square. So if we have a square there, he's not really able to absorb those further dots to the right, or at least it's going to make it harder for him to eat those dots. So that's kind of what's going on in your body in a mechanistic sense when we have absorption. So the next type of drug-drug interaction I want to talk about is induction. So this is another one, kind of like altered absorption, kind of doesn't get the star effect of the next one I'm going to talk about, which is an inhibition. But what induction means is that one medication is increasing the rate at which the body rids itself of another medication by increasing enzyme activity. So what an enzyme is, it's a protein. We have thousands and maybe millions of enzymes in our body, and they all have kind of different specific actions. But there's a certain subset of enzymes, mainly in our liver, that are helpful in breaking down drugs. And basically, the point of an enzyme is to break it down so that you can pee it out. Is what happens in most cases. So when it happens in induction is that the body, in the presence of one drug, it makes more of that enzyme. So if there's more of that enzyme around, kind of more Pac-Man essentially around to chew the drug up, you're going to get rid of the drug more quickly. And that can be a problem too, because if we're giving a dose and we're expecting it to last 12 hours and it only lasts 6, well, it's not getting the same activity that we want. So that can definitely be a problem if we're not watching out for it. So there aren't really a whole lot of drugs out there that cause an induction. I think that's part of the reason why sometimes it's hard for us to remember as clinicians about these drugs. But one class is the rifamycins. They're a type of antibiotic, but they're not really commonly used. They're really used for kind of rare diseases and potentially like in a disease like tuberculosis. So hopefully nothing that you all would encounter, but nonetheless, there could be reasons that our patients are taking those medications. So if a patient was taking a medication like rifampin, and they're also on tacrolimus or Prograf, which is again another anti-rejection medication, their body is going to lower their Prograf levels, and so that can lead to rejection. And of course, much worse side effects as time goes on if it's not treated. So as I kind of alluded to, this is a schematic again with the normal Pac-Man at the top, and then you can see induction at the bottom. You can either have more Pac-Man or Pac-Man's getting bigger. He's able to chew through those dots faster. So he's kind of going through things at a faster rate, chewing up the drug more quickly than he would normally. And so the third type of drug interaction, this one's, I think, by far the most common that we encounter and that we think about, whether it be with transplants or really any other condition, and that's inhibition. And so this is where one medication slows down how quickly the body gets rid of another, usually by competition of those proteins that I mentioned before, called enzymes. So essentially what happens here is it's kind of similar in thought process to the inhibition of absorption, but it's different mechanistically, where kind of one drug is getting in the way of these enzymes chewing up the drug. So if we, to use my past example, we think that drug's going to only last 12 hours, but we give it with an interacting drug that inhibits the metabolism, well, then it might last for 24 hours. And again, that can be a problem. There's more drug there than we're expecting that can start to cause toxic side effects. So an example of this is starting a medication called voriconazole, or VFIN, which is a type of antifungal medication. If you're taking that while you're taking cyclosporine, which is an anti-rejection medication under the brand name Neorel or Gingraf, it can increase those cyclosporine levels. So cyclosporine is an anti-rejection medication, so it's good that we have high enough levels, but at too high of levels, we can actually start to cause problems such as loss of kidney function and lead to tremors. Other kind of neurologic side effects can be common when the levels of cyclosporine is too high. So something that we want to avoid. So just another schematic here using my old friend Pac-Man. We see at the bottom Inhibition. We've got one of those little ghosts that chase Pac-Man around. And so Pac-Man's the enzyme. So this ghost has caught Mr. Pac-Man and he's starting to disappear because he got caught. And so these dots or the drugs are left unchewed. So they're kind of hanging around in the body more than they should be. I just want to come back now to the slide that I talked about earlier. Again, just wanted to give some more specific concrete examples about some of the medications that we use after transplant in terms of the details of those interactions. So we just kind of go through these one by one and talk about, what's going on and how we would manage that if needed. So starting with that top one, fluconazole or diflucan. So in that kind of number coding system that I used here previously, D would be more severe, kind of like a 1 to 5 scale, A through I think E or A through F, A being not so concerning, C being kind of moderately concerning, and D and F being higher level concern. So this is like a higher level concern interaction. So fluconazole is similar to voriconazole I mentioned earlier. It's an antifungal medication and tacrolimus. And we actually, at least at Johns Hopkins, we use these two medications together all the time. So this is a good example where, this can be a severe interaction if it's left unmonitored, but, it's something that we commonly encounter, we're really comfortable with managing. It's not a concern. It's not, a concern for our patients because we're monitoring appropriately. But what's going on here is that fluconazole is inhibiting the metabolism of tacrolimus. So fluconazole is kind of that ghost attacking Pac-Man and stopping Pac-Man, that being the enzyme, from breaking down tacrolimus. So you get too much tacrolimus in your body. So just kind of like with the impact on cyclosporine in the example that I used previously, you can get increased tacrolimus levels and that possibility of toxicity, which is kind of similar to cyclosporine, could cause problems with your kidney, could cause tremor, things of that nature. So how do we monitor this? As I said, we do this all the time. The way that we monitor is by looking at your tacrolimus levels. If you guys are post-transplant patients, I'm sure you're very familiar with getting your tacrolimus levels drawn. And right after transplant, we tend to do that pretty frequently. So we have a pretty good idea of what's going on with any impact on tacrolimus levels, and we can adjust the dose appropriately. So this is a good example of like we need to use both these medications. We need to use fluconazole to prevent fungal infections immediately post-transplant. You may have used other medications, but in a lot of patients, we use fluconazole to avoid fungal infections. We need to use tacrolimus to prevent rejection. And we know these medications interact. So it's like, we know there's an interaction. It can be a severe interaction, but it's okay. We're going to monitor the tacrolimus levels and make sure everything's safe for you. So another interaction using fluconazole is kind of the same idea as the previous slide. Fluconazole interacting this time with nifedipine, which is sold under brand names Procardia and Adalat. Nifedipine is a type of blood pressure medication. basically the same thing is happening here. Fluconazole is acting as the ghost to Pac-Man. It's stopping Pac-Man from chewing up the nifedipine. And so what happens here is that nifedipine, works better, which, could be good if you have really low, really high blood pressure. But if your blood pressure is, well controlled and we start you on fluconazole, that could be a problem. So, when people have too high or too low of blood pressure, when nifedipine's working too well, you can get dizziness or fainting. And, if that happens when you're, around your living room, say you bump your head in a coffee table, that could be, pretty serious. So, most cases we're not so worried about low blood pressure, but if it causes you to lose consciousness, that obviously is a major concern. And so how do we monitor impact? It's kind of going to, or minimize impact. This is going to be kind of a common theme, but we're more monitoring. In this case, we're monitoring your blood pressure and your symptoms, and then we can adjust the dose of nifedipine if needed. We could switch you to another blood pressure medication that maybe doesn't have that same level of interaction with fluconazole. So there's ways around it if it becomes a problem. Next up here, we have another common interaction, mycophenolate, which is sold under brand name Cellcept. There's another type of mycophenolate formulation that's called Myfortic, so kind of goes for that one too. And this time it's with pantoprazole or Protonix, which is a medication that helps reduce stomach acid levels. So it's kind of in same class. If anyone's been on Nexium or Prilosec, it's in that same family with pantoprazole. So this is a mechanism of that first example I used where it's altered absorption. So pantoprazole is lowering the acidity levels of the stomach. And so mycophenolate needs to be an acidic level to be able to be adequately absorbed. And so what happens if you take these two medications together is that we can see lower mycophenolate levels. So we might be concerned about that because mycophenolate is an anti-rejection medication. If you're not getting enough immunosuppression, you can therefore have a possibility of rejection. However, this is one of the examples where we don't generally see a clinical impact. If someone, came in with, mild rejection and they were taking these two medications, that might be a thought we had, but generally mycophenolate has a pretty wide therapeutic window, so it's not impacted by relatively small changes in absorption that would happen with pantoprazole. And so typically don't need to do anything with this. But if we had to do something, we probably look at stopping pantoprazole. I'd say the risk of rejection probably outweighs the risk of, maybe a heartburn episode here and there. So if we had to, stop one of these medications because we were concerned about the interaction, probably pantoprazole would be on its way out rather than mycophenolate. Next up, we have two examples that I've used before. So nifedipine, in this case, can be inhibited by a medication. It can also do the inhibiting itself. So kind of shows sometimes the complexity of how we have to manage drug interactions. They can kind of go both ways in a single medication. So in this case, nifedipine is inhibiting the metabolism of tacrolimus. Won't harp on this too much, but it's got very similar mechanistically to fluconazole and tacrolimus, where nifedipine is inhibiting tacrolimus, causing increased tacrolimus levels, potentially toxicity. And again, we're just going to be monitoring tacrolimus levels to make sure that the levels stay in the range they need to be. So I've hit you over the head with a couple interactions and some details. So just kind of generally, what about other medications? Obviously, a lot of other medications that our patients might be taking. So I just listed a few here, and again, these are just general. There are obviously a ton of, for example, antibiotics, lots of different classes that you could potentially be taking, either to prevent infection or to treat infection, and they all have wildly different interaction profiles. So just some medications in antibiotic class, some medications in blood pressure class can cause interactions, but not all, and not all in the same way. Antacids and acid reducers I've mentioned a couple times. They kind of have a more broad effect. There's a lot of medications that we take that rely on a certain level of acidity in our stomach to be able to be well absorbed. So they kind of can have a more broad impact on a higher number of medications potentially. Anti-seizure medications. I mean, there's not a lot of people on anti-seizure medications, but when they are, that class kind of tends to have a lot of drug interactions with other medications. And then Probably the most common one that's out there that, maybe a lot of us have in our medicine cabinets, could take on a regular basis, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medication or NSAIDs. So there's other examples that are available just as prescriptions, but the two that are available for us over the counter are ibuprofen, which is sold under Motrin or Advil, and then naproxen, which is sold under Aleve. Just as a side note, we generally, at least at Hopkins, we recommend that our patients don't take any non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs after their transplant, because they can actually cause problems with kidney function, and can kind of worsen that with some of the other medications that I have. And I see I have a typo, so I'll try to fix that in medications there before I get these final slides out. So just to kind of wrap up this section talking about drug-drug interactions. So I haven't said this already, but many of you might know this. You want to notify your physician or your pharmacist or someone on your medical team before you make any medication changes. So it's really important that there's someone out there that knows every medication that you take. You might have to provide people with a list of all medications. So, if your care is mainly under Hopkins, but you see, a primary care doctor that's not affiliated with us, we might not know about medication changes that they're making. So it's really important for you as a patient and a caregiver to be your own advocate, to keep a running list of what medications you take and what doses, and also to kind of know, what's changed recently, so that if there is, some symptom that comes up that could be a drug interaction, that's going to help us a lot to kind of say, that's the first thing we're going to look at, what changed recently. We also want to make sure that we're telling everyone about any over-the-counter medications or herbals. So a lot of patients and caregivers and maybe even practitioners, they kind of ignore, what's over the counter. Okay, it's over the counter, it's safe. It's an herbal, I can buy it without a prescription, it's safe. As we'll talk about here in the next section, that's not necessarily the case. So we need to know everything that you're taking, including potentially food, as again we'll talk about next. And lastly, if interactions do pop up, most of them can be managed relatively easily. We can change medication dosage. We can take you off a medication and substitute it with something else. We can monitor anything that's in a narrow therapeutic window, like cyclosporine or tacrolimus. So we've got a way to basically manage everything that comes up. So don't be afraid if you hear or see that there's drug interaction. That doesn't mean there's harm that's going to happen. It just means we need to screen it and decide what to do going forward. So now we'll move on and talk about food and herbal interactions. So we spent our time talking about drug-drug interactions. We'll talk about food and herbals next. So the objectives here are to discuss common food interactions and herbal interactions and strategies to manage. So kind of in a similar vein as we did with the drug-drug interactions, and talk a little bit about why food and herbal interactions differ from drug interactions. And I'll just say here, they differ because I would say they're more difficult to manage or difficult to predict in some ways than drug interactions. So some of you might be wondering, foods can interact. Some of you, may know this. I certainly get questions from my patients about, what can I eat or not eat now that I'm a new transplant recipient. And I can answer some of those questions, but we have wonderful dietitians that can answer those as well. But yeah, fruits and vegetables can interact with transplant medications. Herbal products might also have similar interactions. And really what makes an interaction significant, as I've kind of said throughout this presentation, is what it does to the body. Is it a clinically significant response? So just because, again, whether it's a food or herbal, in this case, interacting, it doesn't mean that it's going to harm you. It's just we need to know about it so we can try to mitigate the effects. So in many ways, food interactions with medications can be similar to drug-drug interactions. So most of the examples I'll use today are chemicals within fruits that can do some of the same inhibition. So again, the ghost stopping, Pac-Man stopping the enzyme from working as well, increasing drug levels. That's really what we see, I'd say, most commonly with food interactions. Some drug interactions inhibit what are called pumps. They're little pumps that can pump medications or or other chemicals in or out of the body. And so sometimes drugs can play with those pumps too. So that's another mechanism aside from the enzyme effect that can impact interactions. So here are some common foods to avoid. And I'd say this first slide is stronger recommendation. So grapefruit and grapefruit juice, pomegranate and pomegranate juice, and Seville oranges. I don't know, I've never really had a Seville oranges or seen it in a supermarket, but they have been shown to have some of the same qualities, particularly as grapefruit and grapefruit juice, in terms of inhibiting different drug metabolism. So these are ones I'd say that, definitely want to avoid if you can. If you really love grapefruit and can't cut it out of your life, to try to use it on a regular basis. Like, if you're gonna use it, don't binge one day and eat a bunch of grapefruit and then go 3 days without eating grapefruit. If you're going to do it, something like have a slice of grapefruit every morning, that would help us see lower variability in interactions with any drugs that might take place. So again, these are the ones that I'd say are stronger recommendation to avoid. The next slide here, more moderation. So don't want you to take away that you can't eat any of these medications, but they all have sort of more moderate potential interactions with drugs, and or maybe less likely to interact with drugs than like grapefruit juice would be. So again, these are just general recommendations. The specific recommendations in terms of what you eat in your diet can't cover every food and every drug interaction in just 45 minutes or so here, but ask your doctor, ask your dietitian about any specifics about foods that you're concerned about. Did want to point out corticosteroids here. It's a little bit different mechanistically in terms of the interaction. Corticosteroids, which two examples are prednisone and methylprednisolone. Those are probably the two most common that we use in transplant recipients. One of their side effects is that they can cause retention of fluid, particularly if we use them at higher doses, which is mainly why you're in the hospital after your transplant, shortly after the hospital. From that point forward, generally trying to taper them to a low dose or even discontinue them. But anyway, while you're on these medications, they can cause you to retain fluid. So we want to try to avoid other things that will also cause you to contain fluid. So processed foods are generally pretty high in salt content. So eating more salt causes more fluid retention. So it's best if you can avoid those where you can. So salted meat, fish, bacon, just like deli meats, they tend to have like a lot of salt in them, though there are certainly other foods that are high in salt content too. Also with corticosteroids, you want to try to maintain or potentially even increase your calcium intake. You can do that through supplementation. There's any number of calcium supplements that are available out there over the counter, or you can drink milk, dairy products, cheese like that, things that are also naturally high in calcium. The reason for that is that corticosteroids, particularly over the long term, can cause kind of a sapping of your bones of calcium that can lead to early osteoporosis or worsen osteoporosis if it's already existing. So that's a way to kind of avoid that, is to increase or maintain your calcium intake. Also eat enough protein. So they got some listing of medications there that are high in protein. That's going to help you kind of maintain your muscle mass, maintain your health throughout your life. So particularly as we age, our muscle mass tends to decrease. So not necessarily anything with regard to interactions, but just kind of good dietary recommendation to make sure you're maintaining protein levels in your diet. So getting into some more specifics about food and drug interactions. Coming back to kind of our heavy hitters here, cyclosporine and tacrolimus, those are two fairly common anti-rejection medications. Probably tacrolimus more common than cyclosporine, but just like I mentioned earlier, these medications specifically can be inhibited by contents of grapefruit or grapefruit juice. So we want to try to again avoid grapefruit juice or grapefruit, and where we can, if we can't avoid them, moderate your consumption. Try to have that consumption be a regular. With potassium or salt substitutes, so like Mrs. Dash would be like a salt substitute, or sea salt They might have higher levels of potassium, and we want to avoid those because tacrolimus and cyclosporine can impact your kidneys and can cause retention of potassium. So we just want to try to, mitigate that where we can. Calcium, magnesium, and acid supplements can interact with tacrolimus and cyclosporine. They can, in some cases, lower their absorption. So we just really have to be careful with what we eat when we're on these medications, because they're ones that are in the narrow therapeutic window, and they're also anti-rejection medications. So we just kind of have to pay a lot of attention to them. Sirolimus or everolimus, which are sold under brand name Rapamune or Zortress, these are less common anti-rejection medications, so there might not be a lot of you out there that have taken these or are taking these now, but it's important to take them consistently with or without food. They are similar to cyclosporine and tacrolimus in that we need to closely monitor them, and so any little changes in absorption that are caused by whether you take them with food or without food can cause potentially clinically relevant changes in the drug level. So we just want to make sure that we're trying to be consistent, make it as easy on us as pharmacists and doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners and other members of the healthcare team when we're monitoring the drug levels for these for you. Here again, no grapefruit or grapefruit juice. Fortunately, this just tends to have interactions with a ton of medications, so I want to avoid them here as well. Myfortic, we kind of hit on this early in the earlier section, but we want to avoid taking with calcium, magnesium, and acid supplements. They can bind up the mycophenolate, make it less absorbed by your body, thereby potentially lowering the level of immunosuppression. Mycophenolate, Myfortic, and Celsep, they're really well known at causing stomach upset. In some cases, if you take them with food, this can prevent it, but it's definitely not fail-safe. People can still have stomach upset when they take these medications, even with food. That's kind of a really common side effect with mycophenolate, unfortunately. And then just some other selected herbal products. St. John's wort is a product that a lot of people use. It does actually, it's one of a few herbals that really has some good data behind it indicating it's effective. In this case, it's effective for depression. The drawback with St. John's wort is that it can cause an induction in some enzymes. So, and if you remember back to the first section, induction is where the enzyme is more active than we'd like it to be. And when it's more active, it can chew through the medication more quickly, thereby lowering drug levels and potentially causing issues there. Vitamin C, I would say, is in some ways maybe less worrisome. Vitamin C is thought to be a medication that can boost your immune system, and it certainly can, but that really only happens when your levels of vitamin C are low. Generally, taking more vitamin C than your body can use just results in you peeing it out. So I wouldn't say there's a huge amount of concern with vitamin C, but if you had low vitamin C and now you're taking a good amount of vitamin C, it may increase your body's immune function, and that could potentially cause an increased risk of rejection. Echinacea, I would say something I would recommend avoiding pretty much in all cases. So it says it's a powerful immune booster, which sounds great. We're getting into the fall, winter season when people tend to get flus and colds. So we've had patients asking, "What can I take an echinacea? I've heard it boosts the immune system," and that's all well and good for fighting colds and flus, but you got to remember, as a transplant recipient, we don't want your immune system boosted. We're giving you drugs purposely to lower your immune system. So echinacea, if it works, it's counteracting that, and that could be a problem for us. Another couple examples, ginseng, that's another one like echinacea that has some evidence that it can be immune stimulating. It might also cause the inhibition interactions and cause problems with medications. So something I would recommend avoiding in most cases, just because it does tend to have potential interactions with a lot of medications out there. Feverfew doesn't really have any effect on the immune system, but like ginseng can cause inhibition in some medications, so it makes them work better than we're expecting. Another common area is teas. So people, may or may not think about teas as herbal products. So I've just kind of listed some examples. Obviously, there are many more potential ingredients and types of teas out there that I didn't list here, but generally green tea is okay. There are really not too many concerning interactions there. Chamomile, peppermint, dandelion teas, they may be okay, but could potentially cause some of those inhibition interactions where they increase the level of some of your medications. So if you're a tea drinker, I ask patients to just bring in, their tea box, and I can look at the ingredients and kind of go through one by one. Because a lot of teas tend to have lots of different ingredients, so I just need to make sure each one of them is safe and not going to potentially harm the patient by way of interaction with their medication. So just like I mentioned with drug interactions, as far as avoiding potential interactions with food and herbals, we're going to want to monitor blood levels for any of those medications that are in a narrow therapeutic window. So there's our mainly anti-rejection medications, primarily tacrolimus, cyclosporine, and then more rarely, if patients are on sirolimus or everolimus, we're going to be consistently monitoring them to make sure their levels are not too high or too low. And then the other way that you can help avoid things is to let your healthcare team know. So if we know what you're thinking about taking, we can screen those through our databases and give you the best advice possible. I was going to say something, but I'll say that here in a couple slides. One last thing on this slide is that also discussing any major changes of your diet. So if you're going from kind of a normal standard omnivorous diet, meaning you eat plants and meat, to you're going to a vegetarian or vegan diet, or you're going to the Atkins diet or something like that. Just let your team know, depending on kind of what you're looking to consume more or less out of, could impact your medication absorption and interaction. So before you make any major changes to your diet, please let us know about that as well. So I mentioned I wanted to talk kind of to start to wrap up about, what's different when we talk about foods and herbals versus drugs. So drugs, it's kind of easier in some ways to know what's going to interact and what's the severity of the interaction. Why is that? Because drugs are really well studied. If you're not aware, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, really requires quite rigorous study of medications. So there are essentially 5 different types of trials. So the first trial is a medication is studied in an animal. It could be a rat, rabbit, dog, monkey, depends on what the drug is, and it might be multiple animals. That's preclinical trials. Then they'll do an initial phase 1 clinical trial where it's usually just healthy members, small amount, maybe somewhere between 10 and 100 volunteers. They'll give the drug to a human to make sure it's not harmful. Phase 2, a little bit larger study, maybe on the order of 100 to 500 patients. That drug will be given to people with a condition that we're trying to treat. So if we're testing a high blood pressure medication, we're going to be giving it to people that have high blood pressure. We're going to see, again, is it safe? Is it causing side effects? And does it work? And then phase 3, that's a bigger clinical trial. So maybe 1,000 to 3,000 participants. Again, getting more data about how well the drug works. Does it cause side effects? Lots of other clinical data points there. If all those things go well, then the drug might be able to be marketed. But then there's phase 4 clinical trials, which is after approval. So drugs can and are pulled after they're studied. So in my example that I just used, the drug might be only studied in 3,500 patients, give or take, before it's marketed. What if we have a drug side effect that's 1 in 5,000, 1 in 10,000? There's a good chance we didn't see it in clinical trials. So if we see side effects when it's given to millions of people, then we might pull the drug or update its labeling. We'll get information about potentially drug interactions. So I know that's not the main point of my presentation, but I just wanted to say, there's a lot of study that goes into drugs. It takes a very long time. They're a very big investment by drug companies. $1 billion is a commonly quoted cost of getting a drug from those first stages of trials to market. So anyway, they're getting a lot of information. They want to know that drug works. The drug company wants to know about side effects and drug interactions because they don't want to have it get to phase 4 clinical trials and it gets pulled off the market. Then they've just kind of lost all their investment. So that's all going to kind of the first and second points. And really the third data points there, I guess covered it all. So it's, it's well studied in clinical trials. We got interaction data, and I guess the only thing I haven't mentioned there so far is that the FDA really requires, it's really heavily regulated in terms of the manufacturing sites. So even if manufacturing sites are in other countries, the FDA still goes there and looks and makes sure that they're manufacturing with good clinical practices, good manufacturing practices that make sure your drug is what it says it is. It's the right purity, and it doesn't have something else in it that shouldn't be. So that's very much different from foods, and particularly herbals. So, foods and really herbals, they're almost never studied in clinical trials. So there may be some cases where a company has gone out and studied their individual product, they're marketing ginseng or St. John's wort, they might study their drug, but that doesn't tell you much about any other product. You'll get maybe an information on a label that says, there's 300 milligrams of ginseng extract here. What you don't know is, mostly for ginseng, that's probably a bad example. Did it come from the root? Did it come from the stem? Did it come from the leaves? And, what's the active ingredient there? You're generally not going to get that information on an herbal. There have been lots of cases where herbals have been studied, and they'll actually have like adulterants. So, I've seen weight loss supplements. Supplements are purported to do weight loss. They actually have like amphetamines in them, or like a drug that's an herbal drug that's supposed to treat high cholesterol. It'll actually have like a statin in there, which is it's a class of medication that's supposed to lower cholesterol levels. So there's really no quality control, unfortunately, in most cases with herbals. I don't say this because I'm trying to convince everyone that all herbals are bad. That's, really not what I'm trying to get across. It's just that there's just a lot more unknown when it comes to herbals. So when we say, with a drug, is it safe? Do we know the interactions? In most cases, the answer is going to be yes. With herbals, we might know, we might really not know that much about it. The data is just not as good when it comes to herbals as with supplement or with drugs. So herbals might be okay, but it's just a lot more unknown. So just to wrap up my last slide here, take home points. Understanding possible food and interactions are important, not only to me as a clinician, but also to you as a caregiver and patient. You can ask to speak to a dietitian during your inpatient stay and likely after your inpatient stay if you want to talk about any interactions or dietary changes that you're planning to make. Talk with us, the transplant pharmacist, if you're planning to take anything else in your drug regimen. So herbals and OTCs, over-the-counter medications we want to know about, we can check those to make sure they're safe for you. And then that kind of wraps it up. So that's the point where I will open it up to questions. I think we've got almost 15 minutes left here.
Well, first, thank you for all of your excellent presentation. I've got several questions here that people have sent in here. If taking the same drug both in the morning and afternoon in different doses, does it make a difference in the overall program level when the higher dose is taken, unrelated to any sort of interaction with other drugs?
That's a good question. So just to repeat that, the question was if you take I think the question was about Prograf. So if, for example, you take Prograf or tacrolimus, if you take 4 in the morning and 3 in the evening, does that have an impact on your outcomes separate from any interactions? Generally, the answer is no. So we're kind of looking at the drug, like okay, let me back up. So generally when the drug gets to what we call steady state, which is just a concept pharmacology wise, that just means that the drug level is kind of at a good level. It's at a stable level. That happens generally within a couple half-lives of when you dose the medication. So for Prograf, within a couple days to a week, any dose change or you starting the medication, the level in your body's kind of have stabilized. It of course will go up right after you take it and kind of a slow slope down. as you get closer to taking your next dose, but that the level of that peak and the level of that trough, the highest level and the lowest level are kind of going to stay the same. So that there be maybe a slight variation in what your peak level is and what your trough level is when you take a higher dose in the morning or the evening, but clinically there's no difference. So it's perfectly safe to take a different dose in the morning than the evening. You know, want to keep them close. So like the example I gave, 4 milligrams and 3 milligrams, you know, that's reasonable, but would you want to take 5 milligrams in the morning and 1 milligram in the evening? Like, no, that's not something that you'd want to do, but I don't see anyone doing that.
Okay, great. Thank you. This next question. I'm a liver transplantee and suffer from horrendous night cramps in both my lower legs and feet. My primary care physician switched, is it Nifedipine for I'm going to
Diltiazem?
diltiazem hydrochloride, excuse me, sorry. As she says, Nifedipine is known to cause or worsen cramps. She is not a transplant expert. Will this cause a similar issue with tacrolimus, or is it okay?
Yeah. So, yeah, the nifedipine, I'm just looking at the read here. Nifedipine is, I would say I'm more familiar with nifedipine, not so much causing cramps as much, but can cause like we call edema, like swelling in your lower legs. I wouldn't think that would cause cramps. To kind of answer your question more directly, yes, diltiazem can have interactions with tacrolimus. You know, probably I would say equally to maybe less severe as is tacrolimus. But again, like I told you like I said in the presentation, as long as you're monitoring your tacrolimus levels, then that's fine. You know, as far as your cramping in your lower legs and feet, my first thought would be more like of potentially of an electrolyte imbalance. So that might be something to talk to your doctor out. So electrolytes would be things like potassium and magnesium. So I might, you know, ask about getting those levels checked. And then it's not necessarily cramps, but tacrolimus can cause like neuropathies, can cause like nerve pain. So I don't know if that's close to what you're experiencing, but generally happens in your feet or in your feet, like in your hands, your fingers. So I know that's not exactly cramps, but it could be a side effect of tacrolimus as well. So sorry, hopefully that's a direct enough answer for you.
Next question. Tacrolimus or sirolimus is checked regularly. Is CellCept levels or should it be, excuse me, is CellCept levels or should it be checked when blood work is done?
No, you don't have to check CellCept levels. So it is possible there is the availability of CellCept labs, but because the therapeutic window, meaning, you know, the difference between the level where it works and where it's too toxic, is very large with CellCept. So in the past, some clinicians had looked at CellCept levels, but we've kind of decided that there's not really any good relation between a CellCept level and the effectiveness of the drug. So there wouldn't be any reason to regularly check CellCept levels, no.
Okay. Seville oranges are commonly used in marmalade. Should marmalade be avoided?
You know, I would say the safest answer is yes. I don't eat marmalade ever. And my sense would be that people, when they have marmalade, I don't know, you know, maybe this person asking the question, you have it a lot, which is fine. But when I think about where drug interactions become a problem, it's things that you take more intermittently. So, you know, I use the example of like you take, you know, say you eat marmalade with your toast every day. Then, you know, that'd probably be a safer scenario than, you know, I eat marmalade only on Sundays or something like that. The trouble with like any herbals or foods, as I don't know if I said this clearly enough, but there's just not a constant amount of the chemicals oftentimes. So, you know, we can't say that 1 teaspoon or tablespoon of marmalade necessarily has the same amount of the chemical that causes the interaction as another teaspoon. You know, where those oranges were grown, you know, how they were made, you know, other characteristics of kind of the preparation. So, with drugs, it's a lot easier. You can say I have 10 milligrams of atorvastatin, and that's the same 10 milligrams of atorvastatin no matter what tablet I take, and you just can't really, it might be the same for fruits and marmalades and herbals, but you just can't say that with as much certainty. So that's, we just really get into being wary about using those. So I would say if you love marmalade, try to do it regularly. That's better than doing it intermittently. But if it's possible, maybe try to cut it out if you can.
Next question. I take magnesium and calcium supplements as well as Prograf. What is the best way to space the dosage so there is no interaction?
Yeah, so with magnesium and calcium supplements, I generally say if they're going to cause an issue, it's usually within a couple hours of taking the medication. So my kind of rule of thumb, I don't know if there's an exact right answer, but my rule of thumb is generally 2 hours on either side. So that gives, like, if your acid levels in your stomach are affected by those supplements, that will generally give them time to kind of move through and your acid levels to generally return to normal. So yeah, about 2 hours is usually my rule of thumb.
Okay. Next question is, are probiotics okay?
Probiotics, yeah, I would say generally that they're probably okay. So for any of you that aren't familiar with probiotics, what they are generally a supplement that contains bacteria. Usually they're like non-harmful bacteria. A lot like a common type of bacteria would be the same type that comes in like yogurt. And we can eat yogurt with no problem, right? So as long as they there are these non-harmful bacteria, they're probably okay. Where I, what I would worry about as someone was coming to me, or if I was a transplant patient taking them, is, my body's immunosuppressed. So is it, usually these bacteria are not a problem. And in most cases, they're not going to be a problem, these probiotics, but, my body's immunosuppressed. So what happens if it's, it's too immunosuppressed? Can these bacteria, can they induce an infection? I think that's probably, honestly pretty rare and out there thing to do. But, I kind of want to talk through with you, if you're my patient, why do you want to take this probiotic? Is there something else that we could potentially use? I think probiotics, where they really have their niche, and they're really, probably a good idea to use is, I would say for non-transplant patients, definitely, if you've taken a lot of antibiotics, especially if you've been in the hospital taking antibiotics, they can replenish those good bacteria in your intestines, because the antibiotics can kill the good bacteria just like the bad bacteria. So that kind of resets things, and those good bacteria can stop the bad bacteria from causing future problems. So that's one area where I think that it's probably reasonable to use. But yeah, I just probably want to know more about the indication to say a definite yes or no for you. So I'm sorry, I can't give you a really super confirmatory answer on that one.
Do anti-inflammatory supplements such as turmeric, affect drug absorption for post-transplant patients?
Yeah, I'd have to look up turmeric. I want to say that I've had patients ask me this before, and I think there was a drug interaction, but without going to my database, I don't want to say anything super certain about that. I'm sorry. We study drugs so much that we don't have as much room to study the supplements, so I don't have that information readily available in my head. So yeah, I don't know if there's a way to get in contact with me after the presentation, but if you can, I'm happy to look at that for you.
Well, somewhat connected to this is, can you recommend a website or resource that has a more complete list of drug, vitamin, herbs interactions that might affect transplant medications?
Yeah, the one I go to is called, if I can put it in can I put it in the chat, David?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So it's called Natural Medicines Comprehensive Database. Make sure this is going to everybody.
Let's see.
So that's the one that I use. It is a paid database. I believe there's a consumer version, like a patient version that is. I'm not sure if that one it requires payment or not. If it does, it's maybe like $100 a year, which may or may not be worth it for you. But that's the one that I found that has the best, like kind of a quick reference guide. I don't know if I'd recommend this to a patient, but you can also, like, if you're looking for like primary literature, so you're looking directly for the studies, you can go to what's called pubmed.gov. That again, they'll have some studies are available to you free of charge, and some are behind paywalls. So like, I might be able to access them if I'm working on campus, if I'm at work, we have access to most studies through pubmed.gov, but you might not have access. There are some, I would say the Natural Medicines Comprehensive Database is definitely the most user-friendly one, where you can kind of just put in your list of medications, you put in the list of supplements, and it kind of spits out, here's the interactions, and it'll go into a little bit more detail about the severity and, what was the evidence behind that. So, was it actually studied in people, or was it studied in a test tube? If it's studied in a test tube, I might be less reliant on it. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. I think that's the best website out there for drug and herbal interactions.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see, a couple last questions here. Do psychotropics interfere with medications?
Oh, that would depend very much on what psychotropic you use. Yeah, that's a pretty broad category. So I'd have to know which specific medication. So if you whoever asked that, if you put that in a Q&A, I'll try to come back to that if you have anything specific you're looking at.
Can you address how to manage different side effects of generic and different brands of medications?
That's a great question. So I generally don't think that there's a huge difference in most cases between brand and generic medication. So I kind of talked through briefly the process of getting a medication to market. And the example I gave was the brand medication. The process for getting a generic approved after a brand name is much shorter and less costly. But there still is a process that generic medications and manufacturers have to go through. So they actually have to, again, go to the FDA and say, here's, we had Lipitor, the brand name medication. Now I'm going to make the generic, and I want to market atorvastatin, which is the active ingredient of Lipitor, and I want to market it in the same strengths as the brand. I have to take my tablet and give it to the FDA and say, here, you can take it and go through tests to make sure, it reached the same peak concentration at the same time after the dose. What we call the area under the curve, which means this total exposure to the medication is similar. So they have to, there's certainly a tolerance. So, it's not like it has to be, the peak level was 6 and it has to be 6 for the generic too. Maybe the generic has to be between 5.5 and 6.5, but it has to be, pretty close. It has to be within a certain percentage of the brand name drug. So sure, there might be slight variations in how a generic medication or, between generic manufacturers, how they work in your body. But really, unless it's a narrow therapeutic window drug like tacrolimus or like cyclosporine, sirolimus, everolimus, really, unless it's one of those medications, I wouldn't expect you to have a clinical impact. And, we've gone through, just as a kind of historical example, we've gone through several different manufacturers of tacrolimus. A couple of years ago, there was actually like a national shortage of tacrolimus, and we had to buy whatever we could get to our patients. So we were switching people's generic, pretty frequently, and we didn't really run into any issues. So if I didn't see them with tacrolimus, I wouldn't expect them with other medications. All that being said, in an individual basis, absolutely, you can have different effects from different medications. Everybody's different, and they're different in ways that we often can't predict. So particularly if that you've changed a manufacturer recently and now you're having the side effect, or now your blood level's not where it used to be before, definitely let us know about that, because that certainly could be what's causing the issue.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to wrap this up now because we are over time. Thank you, Dr. Whistler, for all of your insights.
You're very welcome.
I just need to share with the audience the following from Marty Marin again. So,
thank you for joining us today for Trio Maryland's second virtual transplant conference. We hope it was educational and provided the information you needed to lead a healthy transplant life. I would like to express our gratitude to the Trio Maryland Board of Directors, Ashton Conference Planning Professionals, and also our partners, the Living Legacy Foundation of Maryland, Johns Hopkins Hospital, and the University of Maryland Medical Center. I'd like to thank our speakers for sharing their expertise with us. And a thank you to our sponsors that continue to support Trio Maryland and all of our educational efforts. Trio National, Biloxis, Anatomy Gift Registry, Peak Relief, and the National Kidney Foundation of Maryland and Delaware. Don't forget to check out our sponsors' websites for details and information. All sessions have been recorded and will be available to view on the Trio Maryland YouTube channel. And our email notice will be sent out to you when it is available. Check out our website at www.triomaryland.org to view our calendar for upcoming speakers. Follow us and like us on Facebook and Twitter. I post current information daily, so don't miss out. Check out our YouTube channel for past presentations, and we want to thank you all again, and thanks for starting your day with us.
once again, thank you everyone for coming and participating. Thank you again, Dr. Whistler, for your tremendous presentation. And again, please join the organization, check out upcoming events, and of course, donate to support efforts like these. Thank you, everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your weekend.